Good evening. My name is Eric Sarver from the law office of Eric M. Sarver. I'd like to welcome everybody today to our fourth episode of my weekly talk radio show and video podcast called Employment Law Today. I have on as my special guest today attorney Nance Schick. I'd like to welcome Nancy to the show. Nancy, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for agreeing to be a guest this evening. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty well, thank you. I just wanted to give the audience a little bit of a flavor of the show for those that might be joining us for the very first time, or for those repeat folks who might be coming back. And then I'd love to introduce you to our audience, because I know you have a very interesting background, and we've got some really cool topics tonight to discuss that can really, I think, be of service and help some business owners out there and managers and employers. So in any event, the name of the show, as I mentioned, Employment Law Today. We are scheduled for 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening, that's Eastern Standard Time, here on talkradio.nyc. And in terms of our show tonight, the topic is breaking toxic patterns in employer-employee relations. And if I could just step back a bit, I think that's a great way to segue into what the show is about. So I've been spending the last 21 years as an employment law and business law attorney, and in that role I've helped employers and employees alike. And it seems to me that during the COVID-19 pandemic, with all the different rules and regulations, all the federal, state, and city guidelines that businesses have to follow around issues of employment, issues of hiring employees and firing employees, furloughing, creating a safe workplace, that it can feel really overwhelming. And so I created the show with three goals in mind. The first is to educate, to inform you as a business owner out there, or as an employer or a company in any industry, whatever field that you're in, to understand and know what the employment labor laws require you to do. And by the way, a lot of these employment labor laws far predate the COVID-19 pandemic. So I like to talk about those laws as well as the newer laws you need to follow. And then the second goal of the show is to motivate and to inspire. A lot of people these days are feeling the stress and the anxiety. It's a very natural response, I think, to being in a pandemic. I mean, the first of its kind in over a century. And so that tends to take its toll on people, including in how they interact with their employees and how they run their business. So I want to motivate by having special spotlighted guests who are running a business and doing it successfully. What are their secrets? How are they doing that? And then the final aspect or goal of the show really is to provide resources. And in that regard, I have a special guest each week who will talk about an issue that's either related to employment law or that has to do with helping you to run your business, whether it's through cybersecurity issues, whether it's through marketing, whether it's through video marketing, any kind of issue that would be of importance to you and help you to run your business. So with that backdrop in mind, I'd like to once again welcome Nance L. Schick, Esquire, to the show. And I want to just read a little bit about Nancy, because Nancy, I was really impressed by your background. We were introduced by email networking through a mutual friend, I'll give a shout out to Nina Kaufman, who I think we both hold in high regard. So Nina, if you're watching, hello. And in any event, so now Nancy is an employment law attorney. She's also an ethno-religious mediator and a conflict resolution coach and specialist. She also focuses on diversity training and is an author. And so in some ways, Nance, you and I have some very common ground in terms of the employment law background, in terms of conflict resolution, compliance, diversity training. I wanted to read a little bit more about you, if I could just touch on your background, and feel free to jump in and add or subtract anything. Hopefully not subtract, that means I made an error. But so I'll just say to our listeners tonight that Nance Schick, as an attorney, as mentioned, she's operated a conflict resolution business for the past 17 years, known as Third Year Conflict Resolution. Nancy comes from a background of working at law firms and herself has an employment law firm as well. But her main focus these days is the conflict resolution business. Nancy created the Third Year Conflict Resolution process in 2006. And it's the basis for her year 2014 published book called DIY Conflict Resolution. It's also the basis for Nance's online school, and which Nancy just launched last year. And finally, Nancy helps managers and small business owners to resolve workplace conflicts, from work and misclassification penalties, I think we both know about that from our respective clients, to resolving workplace conflicts, from work and misclassification to hostile work environments. And so while Nancy's taking care of those needs for her clients, they can focus on running their business, doing what they do best, without the stress of all those issues clouding their mind. And finally, Nancy uses a technique, which we're going to get into a little bit this evening, called the DISC assessment, to identify personality conflicts, personality traits, and she coaches her clients to build their conflict resolution skills. And Nancy uses what's known as a third ear process to facilitate her clients' interactions with people who think differently than they do. So Nancy, I hope I summed up nicely what you've described. That.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a mouthful, right? It sounds like everything else these days, right? PPP and idle and pandemic and COVID and PPE, right?
Right.
But it's part of what I do is help people reconcile the many demands that come with running a business, right? And I think that's why I have such a diverse background, is because I wanted a huge toolbox to make sure that I could come up with very unique and creative solutions for individual businesses. And those of us who started our own businesses or even our own law firms, right, we tend to follow a lot of the traditional path, but we also like to create new paths. So being able to pull from these different tools is very critical to me, being able to serve my clients well. And so, yeah, I think you summed it up fairly well. I have a large toolbox, and it really is all about finding the tools that work for the client in the moment. And that's what I work with them on, with mindset and coaching. And a lot of times that's what happens. People come to me with what they think is an urgent legal issue. And I can hear behind that, you and I talked about that, about how often it'll come from a call that says, I have to fire an employee and I really don't know how to do it. I don't want to do it. Help me. And I know right then that there's a different conversation than me just giving them the law, right? Because what I hear in that is, I'm pained by this. I like my employee, but I can't figure out why they're not succeeding. So that's where we start unpacking everything by looking at personality styles and communication styles. And a lot of times we just need to restructure that relationship, and they don't actually need to terminate them.
It's an excellent point. I mean, I hear a lot there. You really covered. I hear about having an arsenal of tools, a lot of tools in your toolbox to help your clients. And the way I see it too, it's like you hire somebody to repair something, and sometimes they'll need a hammer, other times they'll need a screwdriver. But overall, one tool alone doesn't serve the same purpose as having a number of tools to deal with an issue. And I think I agree with you that I found, as an employment lawyer, working with business owners, working with companies, that sometimes they come to me also as well with, they'd say the issue is this employee, and there's a fear that there might be a retaliation claim if we fire them, but we don't believe there was retaliation. And sometimes it's just this question of trying to get through a conflict without going to extremes. Other times a termination is warranted, but the business might not know how to do that appropriately, and they sort of use a sledgehammer where maybe a more finesse tool might be appropriate. I found in my time as an employment law attorney, while I'm not certified as a mediator per se, I've done many mediations, and I've really come to find over the years, and maybe you found this too, that so much of what I do as an employment lawyer involves, certainly knowing the employment labor laws and helping clients with wage and hour issues, overtime pay, but beneath the surface, it's really about finding out where is the employer or the business owner stuck, as I think you kind of alluded to or mentioned, and where maybe is there a personality conflict, or where is there some issue that they keep repeating so that they're calling on me for the third or fourth time, let's say in a 3-year period, to fire someone in the same or different, slightly similar position. And I'm starting to see that while the names change, it went from Susan to Bob, to Fred to Joe, the issue there, often I find that employers don't often communicate very well with their employees, especially if there's a fear of conflict. So they don't tend to write things down, like they don't write down disciplinary issues and so forth. So also is just to say that I do think it's important to sort of have a psychological understanding of our clients. Well, of course, I'm not a psychologist per se, but like an armchair psychologist. And I really do think that, understanding people's behavior and patterns is key. Which brings me to an interesting question. Anyone who may have seen your website or seen my various posts about our show tonight, because I'm very excited to have you on the show, saw that you are involved in a process in terms of helping your clients to assess their profile, their leadership style, their personality. It's called the DISC, D as in David, I-S-C, the DISC assessment. So if I can ask you, Nance, if you tell us all, what exactly is the DISC assessment, and how might this help business owners to gain some awareness of their, let's say their problematic patterns? How might it help them to better select in their hiring process and their managing style? So can you tell us a bit about the DISC assessment? Something that doesn't involve facts or chiropractors.
I'll give you the quick synopsis of it, because obviously there's a lot written on it. There are plenty of books. There are plenty of different organizations that do the assessment and use it. But I got my certification from People Keys through a coaching mastery program that I'm completing through Dan Miller, if you're familiar with him. He's an author who wrote a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love. And now he just released the 20th anniversary, I believe, the Life and Work You Love. So I've been working with Dan for a while and got my certification on DISC. And DISC it's 4 personality styles that, similar to what we look at with Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram. There's so many different personality assessments, but what I like about DISC is that it just is a way to make it simple for people to understand. It's not, it has a scientific basis, and you take the online assessment, but I love that it gives you very actionable steps, and I'm all about action, right? Because the only way we move from where we are is by taking action, right? So D is for dominant, kind of the leader style that takes charge. They're task oriented. They're the just get it done kind of people, more extroverted. You'll see them, it's about 3% of the population actually. So you'll see them a lot of times in CEO positions, managing partners of law firms, right? And so on. Then you've got I, which is the influencing. Those are your also extroverted people, but they're more people oriented. They're your sales people. They are event planners. They're the wide extroverts that are like, let's make it fun. And then you've got the high S people. And I say this, we say they're high in this because during the assessment, you'll score higher in some areas than other, but it doesn't mean you don't have other aspects of the personality style. So don't feel like you're stuck in it. It's not like a horoscope that once you're born, you're stuck with it for your whole life because that was your birth date. It's just a way of using it in conversation to approach someone differently. So the S is a supportive person, also people oriented, but different from the I, they're introverted. They're more of the people that say, let's make sure everybody's okay on a project. And then you've got the compliant, the C, which is also task-oriented like the D, but is introverted and kind of likes to be behind the scene. They're the perfectionists. You'll see them in tech. They're the programmers. They're the web developers. They're not necessarily the user experience people that might be more of an I. They're the ones on the back end that are working out all the code to make it work, right? Make the website go. So what we find is that, there are different fears that come up in personality styles when people are under stress. And that was what got us talking about this, is with the pandemic, we're starting to see certain personality styles play out because we're all under a lot of stress. And so when yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, go right ahead. I could talk about this all day.
Oh, no, and I'd love to talk more about it. We have a take a commercial break, but I think that's a great summary. As you were speaking, I pictured various clients of mine jumping through in my head. So when we come back, let's talk more about how we can apply this DISC assessment and how it applies in the workplace. We'll be right back, folks. Take a commercial break. Please stand by. Eric Sarver here with Nance Schick on employment law today on Talk Radio NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Hey, all you listeners, looking to boost your business? Why not advertise on Talk Radio NYC with very reasonable rates? Interested? Simply send us a message on our website, talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military and politics, all around what makes a great leader, the personal experiences of what's worked and, maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back, everyone, to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm Eric Sarver, employment law and business law attorney with the Law Office of Eric M. Sarver. I'm here with my special guest tonight, Nance Schick, also an employment law attorney, as well as ethno-religious mediator, conflict resolution specialist, trainer, professor. I can go on and on, actually, for a while. Really impressive background, Nancy. We were just speaking, for those that may have heard before the break, about this sort of a personality profile source of the DISC assessment. Nancy talked about the dominant, the leader types, the introverted types, the supportive type, and the compliant type. And what struck me, Nancy, when you were speaking is that, as I mentioned before the commercial break, I have clients that fit into all those categories. And I say that because when I'm dealing with different clients, I need to take different approaches. So if I have clients that are very much task-oriented, they don't want to know all the details, the legal theory, even though I love discussing that stuff. I'll just give them what they want to know. Then I have other clients that really want to understand, or they want to feel as if they're taking the leadership role. Sometimes I have to talk to a client. They might have an idea that's not in their best interest around an employment labor law issue. And I've found that when I can speak to them and show them how they can be in charge by doing something a different way, they become much more receptive than me sort of stating it as if I'm saying you have to do things this way. And I say that because I'm self-employed, I have clients, but for those out there listening tonight, people in the audience that say you run their own business, I wonder how might knowing, let's say you're an employer or a manager at a company, how might knowing and recognizing the personality types in DISC assessment, how might that help with a manager's, say, either their leadership style and management style, to help to avoid some of the employment conflicts that end up often in litigation or arbitration?
Well, I think one of the first things is that I work with individuals on determining what their default style is. And I frame it that way, as it's your default style is where you go when you're under stress, because that's where a lot of times we find ourselves and our clients in the most trouble, right? Is I think especially right now, we talked about this, the pandemic has just brought so much of this forward, where we're recognizing that we're all under stress. We're all going to our default. So, you know, the D's, I's, S's, and C's, I can spot them a lot more easily right now because we're all dealing with something. And so the first thing is recognizing your own default. And the nice thing about the assessments, it also shows, it has 3 different ways of assessing your default personality. And it will show you how you go to a certain place when you're under stress, but it also looks at how you try to represent yourself to the world and how you see yourself. And we compare those charts. So that's one of the first things I can do is I can look at, is this stress that you're under, say the pandemic, is it causing you to be inconsistent? Because that alone will cause additional stress. Right, so that's something that I look for, but then I go to what is the default, because that's the one that you're going to go to, and I can work with right away. And then as we start to balance things out a little bit more, we can start engaging with other people. But that's what I do in my 3rd-year conflict resolution process. Also, is that we always go to get connected with where you are before you start engaging with someone else. Because otherwise you're going to create a bigger mess, right? And we know this, our clients, when they're angry at an employee, or they're angry at a vendor, or they're just upset with a spouse, and maybe bring that to work, right? It's going to create a bigger mess if you're not managing it. And so this is where I start, is let's look at how you're showing up in the world right now with the circumstances you're dealing with. And then I can, the assessment will start to tell you if you're engaging with someone who, like, say you're a high D, you're a more dominant personality, you're like, get it done, let's move on, give me the short version of this. Right. And you're relating to somebody like me who's a high S, I am first and foremost going, make sure everybody's taken care of. So if you're not taking care of me, I shut down. Right? And so knowing that about myself, and knowing that that's the way I relate to a D, or knowing that a D relates to an S that way, it says, I don't need to know all that personal stuff. I don't need to worry about all the people. Just get the job done. Automatically, you start to see, it doesn't mean either one of them is right or wrong. It just means we approach a project differently. And being able to recognize that, we can have different conversations, and it'll get us different results.
So important for employers out there listening tonight to know that, because it's, well, first off, I would imagine that you might find people who have a combination of traits, right? Maybe they're more dominant, but they also might at times have, say, a more compliant side around other people that they're with. What I hear you saying is that by helping, let's say, the business owner or the head manager or the solopreneur, or whoever it might be, by helping them to recognize, be aware of how they're showing up, personality, style, and otherwise, it helps them perhaps to either change their approach with certain employees, or either soften an approach, redirect an approach. And I think that's so important because, you know, we see this in employment discrimination cases a lot, where sometimes an employee is genuinely the victim of discrimination, hostile work environment, or other disparate treatment, truly based on a protected class, you know, their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, and, you know, completely unacceptable. And it does for sure happen. And I've seen cases like that, and I've worked for employees in those situations. I've also helped employers to defend, and in some cases, often to resolve and negotiate those situations. But what I've found too is that there are oftentimes when an employee might conclude that they're being mistreated based on a protected class, and it may not be the case. There may be, I think when you get down to it, I mean, there may be some, we can talk about implicit bias, now that plays out in the workplace, that's a whole other probably hours worth of conversation. But I guess my point is, I've seen times where an employee says, you know, this employer is doing this to me because of my sexual orientation, my religion. And the employer swears it's the furthest thing from the truth. And when you look at what's happening with performance reviews or interactions, sometimes you do really see that it's just two personality styles that are clashing. Maybe it's a D and and an S, that are D and a C in this assessment. So I think my point is that one thing I think about the work you do, it's so important, is if you can help to diffuse some of the conflicts between employers and employees in the workplace, then you've already made huge progress towards perhaps staving off what could be misconstrued as employment discrimination or retaliation. It's funny, we often say this, like when you look at the end result, people don't usually start with a lawsuit filed in federal court. That's not usually the go-to. Most people, they don't want to go to court. Nobody really wants to invite that kind of stress into their lives. It starts with often miscommunication. It starts with lack of communication. So what I hear from you is this way of assessing personality types, and I think it can definitely be a game changer. It could put some of us employment law defense attorneys and plaintiffs law attorneys out of business. So maybe I should end the show now. Nance, thank you so much. Pleasure having you. And no, but in all seriousness, I think it's a very important.
And it's one of those things that we've joked about in the alternative dispute resolution realm for a while, is that a lot of litigation attorneys have said, ADR, they see it as already declining revenue, right? But, I always respond to that with, have you met people?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not concerned that we're going to resolve every conflict in the world. It's just part of how we are. And I talk about that as part of my third-year process also, is that I'm not saying go out and create conflict, but it's going to occur, and it's what we need to grow. So I'm not as afraid of it. That's also why I build conflict resolution skills, right? Because I think we've been trained to think that we can just avoid all conflict, which is a little silly and not very productive, right? Because you think about all the things that have caused us to grow and change and become who we are. So embrace it to a certain degree. You don't have to like it. There's a difference between embracing it and liking it. So what I teach people to do is just accept what is. Get out of the talk about what happened. When I hear a lot of past language, a lot of past tense verbs, I'm attuned to listening to that, because I realize somebody's stuck in something that we can't change. I can't change the past, but what I can do is listen for how they're talking about right now, what they want and need. And that's where we go with the DISC too. And during the pandemic, we were actually talking about this in one of my training calls earlier today, is how people are kind of going to their defaults during the pandemic, and how recognizing the default of your employees, for example, can actually help you recognize, for example, let's say, for example, that your good employee who has really been on top of everything is now working from home, and they're your top salesperson, et cetera, right? They're always out there hustling, bringing in lots of new business for you. Well, now they're working from home. That's your extrovert, and you've now put them at home where they're not engaged with people on a daily basis. They are not handling that well, right? And so what will happen is they'll start to worry about, do people still like them? Are they being rejected? And so they'll start to act out in different ways, is they'll start to push people away if they think they're failing. So you might not hear from them the way that you used to. And as an employer, if you're not aware that that's part of how people work, you might just start thinking that employee's screwing off and it's time to fire them, right?
Right.
But if you recognize you just need to reach out and engage with them, you can make a big difference.
Nance, it's interesting. I was about to ask you for a concrete example that you found in the pandemic, and I thought about the work from home scenario, how that might impact people's personalities clashing. And I think that's a perfect example you gave about the extrovert, let's say, is working from home. I'm an extroverted person, so I can say that there was a Facebook meme going around. It was like, check on your extrovert friends, we're not okay. And it's kind of interesting. So, I definitely would love to get more into this topic about how employers, now that they have this awareness, can put a plan of action in place, especially during the pandemic when they have virtual workers or people are afraid to come back. We are heading towards a commercial break, and I would use that as a perfect time for a mic check on my end. So everyone, please stay tuned. I've been here with attorney, a mediator, and conflict resolution specialist, Nance L. Schick, Esquire, here on Employment Law Today. I'm Eric Sarver, Law Officer Eric M. Sarver on Talk Radio NYC. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a curious person, always asking questions? Do you desire to be in the know? Then join me, Antonia, host of So Now You Know, Thursdays at 5 p.m. at talkradio.nyc. Listen in as I attempt to satisfy that curiosity. I will be talking with amazing, everyday people. Join the fun. So Now You Know on Thursdays at 5 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to our show. I'm here tonight with my guest, Nance Schick, an employment law attorney, as I mentioned, mediator, conflict resolution specialist. Nance, welcome back to the show. Thanks again for being here. It's really a fascinating topic, the DISC assessment, the getting into people's personality profiles, especially in the workplace, where we can, from what I understand, sort of deconstruct people's go-to default, I guess, habits, if you will, of behavior and how that can be unskillful, and that can create a domino effect, right? So if you're, say, a manager or an employer and you're treating your employees a certain way, maybe you're a dominant personality, you're sitting with a more compliant personality type, and you're clashing, it could start the domino effect where perhaps you might even be unknowingly or unwittingly creating a hostile work environment, or you could be accused of that. We've seen like liability issues that come up all the time, I'm sure, as attorneys in this regard. So just to kind of backtrack a bit, we discussed the DISC assessment and how you help some of your clients. I was about to ask you for a specific example, and you gave a perfect one that I was thinking about, which is, people watching this tonight, people listening to the show, they own a small business, maybe they own a restaurant, maybe it's an architecture firm, employees working from home. So I'm just curious, like using DISC assessment, suppose you had a situation where, let's say, an extroverted personality type was underperforming or not performing as well, and your client was the manager and employer, so to try maybe browbeating them because they're a dominant personality type to try to get them to comply. And so then you have like write-ups. I'm wondering, like, how might you, let's say, use some of the awareness that your clients have and make a plan of action. I know we talked about like there's awareness of the situation, then there's acceptance, and I've heard the expression, then there's a plan of action. So how do you, can you tell us a bit about maybe an example, like using the example you gave, like you have the employer and the employees from home and you've got different personality types clashing. How might you help them with the assessment to reapproach their employees?
Well, the first thing that I have to do is, be aware that I actually am a combination. You mentioned that too, and that's something to be aware of, is knowing that, for example, I'm an SCI, I'm everything but a D, right? So I'm everything but the dominant, but I can be, right? And so you learn that in certain situations, you'll respond differently. But in this situation, if you know that your default is to go to the D, the dominant, and you're the one that's, let's just automatically, get it done, crank out that work. I'm focused on the task. I don't want to hear about why you're not getting it done. I just want to see it done, and I want it something on my desk that shows it's done. If you're doing that right now with someone who is more people focused and using that I example,
right,
they're going to start withdrawing. And when an I is withdrawing, what they're really doing is they're trying to avoid rejection. So if you're coming at them as a D, and again, we're assuming this is an employee who's probably been performing well, and you're seeing a shift. It's a different situation if maybe that's been an ongoing problem, and that's a whole different situation where people are now using the pandemic as an excuse to get rid of what they consider a problem that they probably should have been dealing with before. That's a whole different show. Right.
That's a good point. Yes.
We're talking about getting into this before it becomes a claim, before it becomes a major action. So looking at it from that standpoint is that if you start to see your extrovert not engaging anymore, suddenly the person who was always getting people together after work, you're not hearing from them. Something's going on, right? Just reach out to them. They're people oriented, and if you're a D, maybe you still want to just hear, is it getting done? And that's fine. Ask the questions, but you're probably going to have to reach out to engage with that employee. And as the leader, this is the other thing I work with employers on, is if you're the manager or the leader, it's really on you to engage with the employee and give them, right, and this, Eric, you mentioned it earlier in the show, it's on you to lay out the standards. And I think that's another big problem that we see as employment attorneys, is we see that employers hire somebody and they give them the job description, if maybe, a lot of times they're not even that. It's like, we're going to give you the title and we're going to assume you know everything that means in our business. Right? Even though you've been here 30 seconds now, we're going to give you a whole bunch of work and you're just going to magically do it perfectly. So especially right now, we have to be mindful that circumstances have changed and it may take more employee engagement. I notice it in my classes as a teacher. I'm teaching online now, right? I'm not doing as much live like we're doing right now. And that means a lot more hand-holding for my students in order to get them the same things that I would have been able to give them in the classroom. So it's just accepting that and starting to recognize that you have different tools that you can use. So being a dominant personality is not bad. If you just recognize how that tends to function and how it tends to come into conflict with people who have a different approach. Doesn't mean any of them are wrong. It just means you have to recognize them, and we need all of them. Like, we need the dominant, we need the influencer, we need the supporter, and we need that compliance person. We need them all.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's a very excellent point there, that we really, all these different personality types don't have to necessarily, by their nature, clash. And often they're very symbiotic. If you notice, we're talking about business owners and employers and employment situations. But if you look out in the world, I look at some people, some of the best friendships I've had in my life were people who might have a very different personality type. Maybe I'm a little more on the extroverted, energetic side. Some might say hyper, I'm going to say energetic. And then my friends might be much more of a very laid back, low key, more quiet type. And so I think it can be a very symbiotic relationship as long as there's a give and a take and an understanding and a respect for each one's personality. And it's interesting you talk about that in that context, because again, what we're talking about on the show for employers, for business owners, could just as easily be taken into family relationships and friendships. So really, it's good to have this. It's kind of a very useful tool on more than one level. I guess an interesting thought comes to mind about when in the, say, the process of a conflict might you introduce this DISC assessment? In other words, would it be early on, let's say with your client starting to see a conflict arising? Would it be more towards the time when a conflict is escalating? Or I think I can guess, but I'm just curious. I know this is like your field. I want to hear how you might use this and implement. Yeah.
I've used it in a couple of different ways. Not surprisingly, I'm going to give the lawyer's answer of it depends. Right. And so, I can give a couple of examples that lay it out fairly clearly. For example, a mediation, I would not have normally done that during a mediation, but we had a breakdown with the two parties. Some information came out that I wasn't expecting, that of course they were privy to, but that it came out during the mediation, and I realized that some of their personal past was getting in the way of them communicating, and how they were seeing each other based on their past and not fully recognizing the interactions that caused the end of their relationship now coming into the workplace. So I offered it in that circumstance to just give them a breakthrough in the way they were relating to each other so that we could proceed more effectively with the mediation. In a different context, I had been approached by an organization that had an entire department that wasn't getting along. I'm sure it wasn't as dramatic as they said. I'm sure there were alliances being built, which is sometimes dangerous too, right? We want a whole alliance toward the goals of the department. And so in that situation, they had called me to say, I want you to mediate. And I said, 17 people is going to be really difficult to have mediation. So I said, why don't we start with doing a DISC assessment, and we did do the individual assessments so that each person in the department got a feel for how they're communicating. And then we can there's a group one that you can also do that gives an assessment of your entire group and how they interact. So you suddenly find out that you have 4 high D people or 5 high S people. And if you start to understand the dynamics, you can see why your D's might align together, your C's might align together, and so on. And these alliances that were being built were breaking down because we needed everybody to come together as a team. So those are the 2 ways I primarily use it. If I'm coaching someone, a lot of times they come and they ask for that as the first step because they know that they're stuck. And they don't know why. So they said, maybe having some insight about how I show up in the world will help me.
That's a really great point. And it's interesting how you can use this assessment both early on, but also later on. It could be at the mediation stage when a conflict's, really come to a head, or it can be, earlier, preventively, proactively, which I think is always an ideal way to go. I've represented clients, employers who have been defending against suits or frivolous suits from employees they hired. It's the same type of employee that they're hiring over and over again. It's a hostile employee, or it's a very passive-aggressive employee. And so I'll often offer them now we're in the defensive mode, and now we're in either a potential litigation or mediation. But if they can back it up a bit, right, we can walk it back and look at the situation. Why is my client hiring the same type? And if it's the fact that there may be, say, an unresolved, S who wants to be a D, wants to be a dominant person, and they're reliving some old conflict with an employee, it could really be a game changer. I think my philosophy for my clients is that the more harmonious and the more transparent and the more communicative of an environment that you create in the workplace, right? You have transparency, harmony, and communication, the less likely that you'll have implicit bias and discrimination and microaggressions creep in. And that's what leads to, those are the termites that eat away at the wood, which is the foundation of your employment, setting. So I'm going to use that metaphor in another speaking engagement probably in a couple of weeks. But for now, we're going to take a brief commercial break. So everyone, please stick around. I'm here with Nance Schick from Third Year Listening, and also her employment law practice as well, here on Employment Law Today on talkradio.nyc. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sarver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Nance Schick, employment attorney, conflict resolution specialist from third year conflict resolution, also an instructor in compliance and diversity training specialist. And Nance, welcome back to the show. We talked a lot about, right, unpacking the personalities of employers, and business owners, and managers, how we can help people become aware of their patterns and break those patterns, and how that can lead to, right, and foster a more harmonious workplace. And I guess I think you and I know as employment law attorneys that, as I mentioned before the break, I believe that the more harmonious and the more transparent and communicative the workplace, the less likely the chance of microaggressions or bias or discrimination creeping in. But that's a double-edged sword about transparency and communication. And so it leads me to think about a topic that I think is relevant for employers during the pandemic. It has to do with boundaries, right? A lot of what I hear you talking about has to do with knowing and understanding the limits and respecting personal boundaries. And with the pandemic, it seems as if, a lot of people's personal and business lives have been very blended, right? You're on a Zoom call with your staff and you see people's kids in the background running by, you overhear someone's, husband or wife talking, or you see that, maybe they got their guitar in the background. Oh, you play guitar? Or even just some little thing, and there's a lot, I think a little bit less of a separation from the employer, the business person that shows up, the employee, and private life. So I wondered, how do you handle and address, or what advice do you give, let's say, to your clients, business owner who might be perhaps unknowingly asking too many personal questions of their employees, especially now since we're also virtual and we're all sort of in this weird space where people there's less formal often on calls, so yeah, what are your thoughts about that in terms of identifying those issues?
It's interesting. It doesn't normally show up immediately as the employer coming to me and me saying, oh, I now know that you do it. In that circumstance, it's probably that there's been some sort of complaint, right? Usually it's an internal complaint that someone felt that an employer, manager, coworker was asking too many personal questions. And I've been in that situation myself. And so at that point, even though I've been telling the viewers today and the listeners that If you're the employer, it's on you to lay the foundation for the key performance indicators in the job, right? But if it's about your comfort level with sharing your personal information, that's on you, the employer or the employee, right? That's where you need to set the boundaries. But I can also understand that conflict of being afraid not to play the game. I've been in that situation, you know, where I had an employer that used to hold our staff meetings at the bar and demand that we have a drink with him, right? You know, as employment lawyers, yeah, the bells are going on, the whistles, right?
Yes.
All
Took a deep breath there.
Right? So it's definitely something to be aware of. And I know where I'm usually going to see this is with the personality type that I have, which is the high S. I'm so people oriented, and probably your high I also, right? So people oriented that sometimes we blend the work and the personal. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not a person that thinks it's realistic to try and, you know, carve out some sort of box that you fit in. And we're seeing this, like you said, with the pandemic, because, you know, we're learning so much about people just by what's behind them in a Zoom call, right? and so I'm more of from the mindset that be aware that if you're people oriented, that knowing everything about them might not be, even though it might make you very comfortable and make you feel closer to them, it might not be the same for them. And that's what we're talking about with the DISC assessment, is looking at things from both sides, right? Recognizing our own tendencies, but the assessment will also show you how you might interact with other people and make them uncomfortable. And then it'll give you some steps that you can take to not do that, to reach out and extend the hand that brings them into your world on your level, and you can have a different conversation. So if you know that you've got somebody that asks a lot of personal questions, you could privately, that's another thing, is do it privately, especially if you know you're dealing with a high S or a high C who's more introverted. They're not going to want to be called out, right? And of course, a dominant person has a fear of being taken advantage of, right? So if they feel like you're manipulating them in some way, that's going to blow up in your face. So it's really learning about the different dynamics and not making anybody feel bad about who they are and telling them that they have to change and become someone else, because we're all different. So it's just a tool for us to learn new skills so that we can come together in different ways. Because again, we need all of these personality types on our team to get things done.
Right. You know, I've had cases in the past where I'm defending an employer, or there was a potential case, and often I found that when, let's say, whether it was a dominant personality, and just to tell our viewers that we have DISC, dominant, I is introverted, S is supportive, and C is compliant. Is that right?
Actually, I is influencing.
Influencing. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So because your S's and C's are both introverted, and you're dominant, and your D and I are more extroverted.
Okay, that's my handwriting. Couldn't read there. I wrote it. Okay. But,
and I'm giving you a lot of information in a short period. So.
And it's really helpful information, I think, for our viewers and listeners tonight, too. So I appreciate that. I think that in that regard, too, when you have employers sometimes that are overly intrusive, it could lay the groundwork for a discrimination claim, especially if it's a man and a woman interacting, and it may create an unknowingly charged environment. Somebody may feel that somebody is, trying to, say, flirt with them or groom them, and it could, create all kinds of problems. And it may not be on the person's mind whatsoever, but I think it's important. So what I hear you say is, through your company, you help not only with the resolution of the conflict if the people did not come to you first, but also you help them, people proactively, to recognize and set healthy boundaries in the workplace, which is so crucial during this time, I think, during COVID, because of A, the stress that we're all under, which makes us go to our default settings, and B, because of the blurred boundaries. And so I think, with that, I wanted to give you some space to sort of wrap up and to tell our viewers and our listeners tonight, Nance, how they might get in touch with you. We've got a couple minutes or so before the show's end tonight. Just wanted to see, can you maybe, do you have some info you want to share with us? I believe you had a slide that you sent to me, and I will try to locate that slide. Let's see if my Zoom skills are, I want to share your slide with the screen. Hold on one second here. Let's see if I can get that going. In the meantime, why don't you tell our viewers like how they can reach out and contact you?
So my primary contact is through my law firm website. It's N as in Nancy, SCHICK, my last name, LAW.com. So Nancy, right, Nancy at nsschicklaw.com is my email address. And it's Nancy with an E. So that's probably the easiest way. I have some more information about the DISC on the website. I also have a YouTube channel. I occasionally talk about DISC. I talk regularly about third-year conflict resolution and how to listen differently. I have, as a matter of fact, I was recording a video right before our show today about not only why it's important, this is the follow-up to why it's important to listen differently, but how do you do that, right? Because we have all these taglines and everything out there, and they sound so good, and they make nice hashtags, and we share them, and yay, we feel like we're in the movement, right? And then it comes time to take action. And that's, again, why I really like the DISC, is because it gives us a lot of different ideas for how we as individuals can take actions within the way that we tend to function in the world. So if we're more introverted, being asked to go out and march or speak at an event might not be that comfortable for us, right? And that those C personalities, they want to be perfectionist and stay behind the scenes and get the, get the system together. So we don't want to ask them to go out and do sales, right? And so it's just recognizing that, it's okay that people are who they are. Sometimes training will change that, but we also need to be aware that sometimes you just don't have the right fit for the right job, right? And rather than making that person a demon and firing them, right, and inviting a lawsuit, we want to just look at each other as human beings with different personalities and skills and experiences, wants, needs, etc. And we really can use all of this to come together. And I've even terminated employees where it was a joint resolution where we both recognized it just wasn't working out. And we're still friendly. That's a great way to end things.
It really is, it's like, people don't always realize that, you can have a warm, I would say fuzzy, that sounds almost like a negative connotation, but a very warm and positive outcome. And that actually is a win, even for the employer. Some employers want to go in and sort of fight when they have a conflict. And often, it's the old, you catch more flies with honey, or there's a story of the wind and the sun trying to blow the person's, get the person to take their coat off, right? And the sun gently warms them, they take it off, the wind is blowing harshly. So, I think we covered a lot there. Again, your website, my apologies, I'm trying to get your slide to flash on the screen, but if people want to reach you, it's
nsschicklaw.com.
So nsschicklaw.com, and your name again is Nance L. Schick. I will be sure to post that on for our listeners and viewers tonight, just so people know. We have this will be on talkradio.nyc and also be on Facebook. So we have to wrap up for the evening, but I really want to thank Nance Schick for appearing on tonight's episode of Employment Law Today, Breaking Toxic Patterns in Employer-Employee Relations. Folks, tune in. We're here Tuesday nights. I'm here Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. with dynamic guests like Nancy at talkradio.nyc. And I thank everyone for joining us, and I wish you all a very, very pleasant evening. Nancy, thank you. Truly, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
No, take care.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC.